You're listening to What's Contemporary Now, a show about culture and the people, places, and things that together make it up. They're the antithesis of media-trained, maniacally articulate, and describe themselves as two grown dirtbags just trying to navigate the male zeitgeist. Their podcast, Throwing Fits, which according to them is the only podcast that matters, has become a fast-growing community, brand collaborator, and despite its DIY and independent nature, seems bound for the big leagues. James and Lawrence are the fashion bros that give bros a good name and showed up today with their trademark unfettered energy that makes them such a favorite to listen to. In this episode, we get them to give us all the goodies on everything from style to New York City and the fast-growing culture they've successfully created under the banner of their own show.
This is James Harris.
This is Lawrence Schlossman, and we're talking about what's contemporary now.
So let's just jump right in. Obviously, you guys both have your respective stories before the shared journey begins, and Larry being the enlightened bro from Jersey who somehow stumbled into economics degree with the intention of pursuing a career in finance. I'm guessing you're feeling pretty grateful at this point for that financial crisis that derailed things in 2008.
Yeah, also, I'm thankful for being too stupid to actually go to business school. That's why I basically majored in economics and got a fine, beautiful liberal arts education.
And what about you, Jimmy? You're actually a proper city boy, having grown up in Manhattan, right? You studied geography of all things, which sounds like an expensive degree with not a great deal of utility. How'd that go?
That's basically it. But yeah, born and raised, studied social geography. So I can't just like point to a capital on a map and, tell you what state it's in or whatever, which, has its cerebral application. But yeah, no immediate usage unless I worked for Google Maps and actually paid attention in GIS class.
And you guys didn't meet until 2011, right? When you guys were both at a fashion PR company?
Yeah, at a company, BPMW, no longer around, but it stood for Brand Pimps Media Whores, which was always fun to write on our tax forms and lie to our parents and grandparents about what it actually stood for.
Yeah, it doesn't really play super well around a Thanksgiving table,
I wouldn't think so. And when the pair of you met, was it love at first sight? I feel like you guys got quite the dynamic going.
I think my first thought must have been like, why is this 20-something dressed like a 40-something-year-old guy? This was Lawrence's heavy #menswear era, coming from the South, from Wake Forest, and yeah, like dressing like a good old boy.
Yeah, I think my first thought was, why is this guy who's older than me just an intern, and here I am with a full-time job? But yeah, I think, James and I like to joke that it was like the friendship was built around like poverty trauma bonding, because even though I was full-time, I was making like less than $40,000 a year. And I don't even know, James, like what the hourly rate was or whatever for an intern.
Well, yeah, you don't have to speculate. I was living off savings from a job I had previously and quit. And then out of just absolute frustration with working for the man and working in odd jobs, like mostly babysitting on the side. And yeah, it was like a friendship born out of necessity, where we're the two youngest, brokest people at the company, definitely least cool. And it was like, all right, you want to go to the taco truck or Subway for lunch today? It became like, all right, we're starting to be able to get invited to some events. Do you want to go to this brand that typically has good sliders? Or do you want to go to this other event that typically has better beer options? Just living off appetizers and hors d'oeuvres for full last year.
Yeah, our social calendar was mainly based around what was free at the current moment.
Isn't that some type of a rite of passage, though? I feel like so many people who have come into this industry, and obviously not all of them, because there's a whole other sort of trajectory, but it's the way you get that grit that you guys have undoubtedly applied in all these different projects that you've done leading up to Throwing Fits. Don't you think there's some type of value in that struggle?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think Andy Warhol living off hors d'oeuvres for like 15 years. It's not like a bootstrap mentality, but if you actually care about having fun and like being in New York, which for me, it was never a choice about being or living anywhere else, just having all my friends and family here, it's like you just have to make it work. Obviously, we're not in like a dire straits or in a crazy position. That's just what it was to, if there's a chance to get free food and make friends and make some sort of like networking or connections that we're still palling around with, and having the people that we met 15 years ago at these free slider events, they're now the guests on our podcast. Cause like we all ping ponged our way up, back, diagonally across the industry. And it's those bonds you make are forged in fire. And by fire, I mean little shrimp taquitos that you get for free.
Yeah, I think it was just James and I were like a product of a time and a place. And I personally wouldn't change a single thing about that. Cause like James said, like the friendships that we made are still holding strong over a decade later. And ultimately, even if we had met nobody else that gave a fuck about us at all. We met each other, and that's what's important.
I think it was Failing Upwards that came first, right? That was the first project you guys had done outside of what you were doing at Complex.
Yeah, so we had a short-lived YouTube show while we were at Complex. Basically, they saw this was before Complex became like the video monster that it is now, the behemoth.
Yeah, the Fashion Bros.
Yeah, so they were just like, you guys are funny and you just like to roast each other and make fun of each other and make fun of a lot of other things. Like, why don't we just put a camera on you? So that was a lot of fun. And unfortunately, it was just like, we were like, yo, we like doing this. Can you please pay us some more money for all this extra work? And they were like, nah. Like, okay. So he stopped doing it. So then eventually Lawrence left Four Pins to go to Grailed.
Yes.
And for me at this time, I had gone up from like the guy that was writing all the listicles, like top 10 t-shirts you need to buy this week, to I was the editor of Complex Style, but then I graduated into a more like kind of larger strategic and partnerships role. And at this time in, mid 2010s, not finally, but like, it's when a lot of these like digital media publications started getting serious money from advertisers. And with that serious money comes like serious attention and a lot of guardrails. And Four Pins shuttered when Lawrence left, and it was perfect timing because I don't think that Four Pins could have survived in a world where Complex was getting the amount of advertising dollars it was. And Complex Style also had this like voice of expertise, but irreverence that I lost count of how many times I got in trouble. They're like, the advertisers are looking at this. So at that point, like with all this big money floating around, we could no longer have the voices and voiciness that we had brought to Complex and Four Pins. It felt kind of like our opinions were just like clipped, felt a little like, not censored, because that's obviously such a not what it was. But we were looking for an outlet, and we no longer had our outlet to like talk shit beyond just like Twitter. So Lawrence the Grailed, I started going down there like to their offices maybe once a month. It was just an excuse to hang out, order some pizza, get a few beers, and just talk about whatever the topics were, ranging from like sexting to fucking Travis Scott sneakers to whatever collaboration or whatever like our legacy we were had our eyes on that week or that month. So that was for me like why I felt like I needed like that, or no longer had like, that expressive outlet beyond once like the digital media landscape and advertising landscape really shifted into like serious money.
Yeah, James and I were like, fuck it. This is like a free space. Why don't we try to do a pod? This is 2016 and people were podcasting already. I'm not trying to claim that we were like first or anything, but there really was like no one doing podcasting about like the stuff that we were super interested in. There was obviously Brooklyn comedians and people that we were, I don't know, friends of friends with that were like finding some success in the space, but we were just like, let's take this leap. And like James said, yeah, it's an excuse to like get some beers and a pizza. And I remember even that first episode was recorded on one microphone, like just having no idea what we were doing and also not caring and having no pressure if anybody listened. Like I even remember that first episode recorded on one mic. We like were a little buzzed. We probably had some beers and we're just like, let's just put this on SoundCloud. Literally there are zero stakes. And obviously you trade some of that to like have success and be able to work for yourself and do this full time, however many years later. But yeah, I just remember being like, who gives a shit? Let's just do it to do it. And who cares if anyone else cares? We're having fun. And ultimately, I think that, at least for me, that foundational kind of, I don't know, it's a bit naive to be real, but like that was a freedom that felt like special and unique at the time. And I think ultimately it clearly paid off.
It was also before the harsh realization that everything on the internet is forever. But I think we still kind of move like that, which, working for yourself, you do have that freedom a little bit, that like, who cares? Like, fuck it, we'll do it live, which I think is important in retaining like that streak of independence. Because again, it's been there when your voice gets neutered, and it's not great to have to be like, oh, wait, walk it back, run it back. Or, can we say that? I don't know. And, when we do brand partnerships now, like obviously that type of stuff is in place. That's why we limit ourselves to really only working with putting guardrails in place where we absolutely have to, but it's like only with brands and partners that we actually truly fuck with.
I also think people look at a story like yours and they perceive something like Throwing Fits to be this kind of phenomenon, right? These cool dudes who just sort of decided to fuck with something new and it worked in their favor. But there's obviously these precursors, having shuttered Failing Upwards and what was it that we were talking about? Fashion Bros and obviously Four Pins. What was it that drove the pair of you to want to co-birth a new brainchild such as Throwing Fits?
I don't think this was like a part of a master plan. I think we started doing it. Basically, we launched Throwing Fits in its current form in January 2020. And by January 5th, 2020, we were like, oh, we can probably do this full time.
Yeah.
So we left our jobs in spring 2020. Great timing, losing our healthcare. But it's coming up on 5 years. We haven't really ever had to look back. Every week, every day, every email, every episode is like a fucking giant question mark. There is no grand plan. There is no master plan. There's no 5-year plan. It's doing what feels right. Everything's like unanimous 2-person decision. Obviously, there's like pros and cons to that. But so far, it's worked out. And I think we haven't shot to the moon and become like the most popular. We are the most popular men's fashion lifestyle podcast in the world. We're not Joe Rogan, but I think we're fine not being Joe Rogan. And I think that we are, and I know we're going to talk about it in a little bit, but like we're able to do things that we really enjoy doing, and we're able to not do things that we don't want to do.
Yeah.
That people in a position where it's like, if you're kowtowing to the greater powers, or your business model set up in a way where you have to play ball, like a lot of the times, like, you see the bullshit detectors are always going off. We just don't want to do the stuff that we don't want to do. And I think having that freedom is rare, and I don't think we take it for granted. And if anything, like being freed up to pursue outside endeavors related to the pod and the brand, but to grow the brand beyond just like a podcast is like, I think, our favorite thing. Obviously, the podcast is at the core, and without that, nothing else is possible. But I guess if there's any grand plan or grand through line, it's, could people that don't listen to the podcast engage with us in some way? And could people that only engage with like the merch or the memes and don't engage with the podcast, could we kind of retain those separate but related audiences and grow each of them without sacrificing one for the other, or only paying attention to one at the expense of another? I don't know. It's just, we are our own, like, I'll keep Lawrence in check. He'll keep me in check. That's just how it goes. And it's worked.
Yeah, this is going to be funny coming from me, the consummate yes man. But to James's point, saying no when you don't want to do something, having that ability, that's priceless. And that's, I think, the biggest thing or one of the best things that has come with the fact that it's a fully 2-man operation. Obviously, we have our support staff, the guy, I was going to say kids, they're not kids anymore. The guys that have been with us, some of them back from the old pod, the previous podcast endeavor that shall not be named, as we like to joke. But I would like to say that the risk that we took launching this thing independently as Throwing Fits, like, we did find success with failing upwards, which again was like a surprise. I just can't stress enough how we might have been a little bit early in terms of the podcasting space, but like, we had no idea if there would even remotely be an audience, because again, like, all the stuff that James and I had worked on that failed, it's one of those things that was like, everything was either a little bit ahead of its time or a cult classic, but nothing that necessarily had the kind of reach or impact that monetarily affected us directly. So I guess there was that question mark, but the podcast, luckily, there was some audience there enough to then say, all right, let's go for broke, and basically relaunch this thing where we are retaining 100% of the ownership, and then also the responsibility if the thing ultimately fails.
Well, I know you said there's no 5-year plan, but you guys are definitely epic at things like world building. And I feel like the show's cadence is kind of maniacal, but always articulate. And it's just so beyond on point that I couldn't help but wonder if fashion is just sort of the storefront to a larger narrative around entertainment that you guys are pursuing with brand extensions along the way.
I mean, that's the joke we always say, is fashion is a visual art form and we are a sonic medium. This should not work. If anything, I think this is so basic to almost sound like obvious to the point is stupid, but Complex was a pioneer in kind of understanding that, like, guys, people, humans in the 21st century aren't defined by like a single interest. You can like fashion and like sports and skate and fucking have a boring 9-to-5 job and have a kid and party. Everyone's a fucking multiple, right? No one's a singular, like, I only like pop culture. I only like sneakers. And Complex was early on that. Like, you can't, it's, again, so obvious as to sound stupid. We talk about how, like, fashion is like the portal into the Throwing Fits universe. We'll have on Allison Roman. She's a home chef. Like, why is she on the fashion podcast? I don't know, but it works. I think fashion is, and clothing and personal style is the most immediate form of self-expression that you can either emit and also receive. So I think that even if you claim not to care about it, you're still presenting self as soon as you step out on the street. So like everyone knows a little thing or two about personal style and fashion. Maybe that's not the case, but yeah, fashion now. And again, not to sound so obvious as to sound obtuse, but it's like fashion now is so ingrained in the mainstream where you have athletes doing tunnel fits. It is no longer like a subculture or sub-interest. It touches on all the pillars of the zeitgeist, whether that's sports, pop culture, film and TV, various entertainment, sneakers, that's its own thing, politics. I don't think that we're necessarily like we are in the fashion charts. To peg us as a singularly fashion podcast, I think is a mistake, or like kind of reveals someone's narrow perspective on what a thing can be. It's so funny. Like people are just like, wait, but you're a fashion podcast. And it's like, yeah, but I'm also just going to say everything I just said for the last 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'm going to double down. I mean, James said portal, I say vessel. I've always thought about it this way, whether it was like with potting with James or at Four Prints, it's like, what do we talk about when we talk about clothes as guys? And there's so many other things like where it's almost like, right, clothes is the connective tissue, the DNA, like James said, that touches all these different things. But there's so many other facets that are extremely interesting to us, the co-hosts of the show. So we're always going to enjoy talking to a rapper as much as we enjoy talking to a chef, as much as we enjoy talking to an actual fashion designer. It's almost like annoying when it's like, oh, the fashion podcasters. I'm like, okay, if somebody listens, they understand that I'd like to think there's so much more that is being discussed every week. And at superficial level, jokes and messing around, and then also, a deepness and a thoughtfulness and a sincerity, because like we do really care and want to have great conversation just at the end of the day with anybody.
I love that. I don't want to stick on that too long because obviously we'll get into a lot of the other aspects of what's discussed on the show. But you guys have had some pretty impressive collaborations, including what you had done with Mr. Porter. So going back to all of these brand extension ideas or the future of what Throwing Fits looks like, what can you share today? Is there anything else in the mix that we can look forward to seeing?
I think collaborating with brands and the people behind those brands that we love and respect has been like one of the most fulfilling parts of the job. Being able to work with Our Legacy last summer was like a literal dream that I couldn't fathom ever happening, and it did. The foundation of our business is subscribers, but that gives us having that very solid base to build upon. We've started dabbling in like cut and sew, and we can take the time and we have the flexibility. And again, like we're not risking everything on making clothes because we're a podcast, but we can start to make clothes that we feel proud about and that we actually wear. There are days where I'm walking around and it used to be like, oh shit, I'm accidentally in head to toe Our Legacy. Now I look down, I'm like, oh shit, I'm accidentally in head to toe Throwing Fits, cut and sew, and Our Legacy. So expanding the cut and sew program, I think, is something that we are very excited about and hopefully seeing soon. I think the caliber collaboration and collaborators is ratcheting up, although like we are always trying to think about how we can like work with maybe like the more like emerging and small brands that are like doing like exciting shit, as well as the big guys, the big dogs. Getting a fucking office space would be great so we can move out of my apartment. If anyone listening wants to sponsor the office, let me know. Bang my line. And yeah, I think that to Lawrence's point where it's like having an interesting conversation, and I'm a big believer in the power of saying no. As the profile of the podcast gets bigger, as we get inbound pitches, we want to start being able to say no to names that, and like bold-faced names that we think just would not necessarily make for the best use of our time and our brain power. I know that this person has like a fucking movie or whatever, but like we don't think that it's going to work. Instead, we want to do a podcast with this person that has a few thousand followers on Instagram, but they're doing really exciting shit and being much more intentional with the choices, big and small.
Yeah, intentionality is, I think, the key word for me in what James said. And I think that podcast merch is nothing new. Like cool Pod Save America hoodie. Support the shows that you fuck with. James and I have obviously dabbled to much success in the merch game. But I think that when it comes to the Throwing Fits private label cut and sew stuff that we are doing, it's like we are trying to truly put our money where our mouth is. Like we feel like we have great taste. We feel like we have a great understanding of this world. And as we've grown and been able to kind of surround ourselves with all the resources that it takes to create a brand that we are proud to wear. James said, often we'll find ourselves just like, whoa, shit, I'm wearing a fit that I made. We're trying this out. We're still in the early stages, but we're trying to really expand that. I wouldn't say like dive head first in 2024, but like we're putting the processes in place and doing some sampling on some stuff that I think will be really interesting in that, yes, it is coming from two guys whose foundational product is a podcast. I understand. It is, I think, I think comes from a real place of, again, caring about how we project ourselves, like James said, how personal style is this journey and not some destination that you just arrive at and you're done. And I think that we can, as we grow, we can continue to create clothes for ourselves and the people that believe and trust in us.
Yeah, anyone can buy a fucking hoodie with a podcast name on it or a tote bag or whatever because you like want to just be like, I listen to this podcast. But we want to make this stuff that kind of like transcends logo and just like code sending. I think that something Lawrence and I have in common is like an anti-establishment streak where it's like, as consumers of the general zeitgeist, I don't respect people that are just like shilling whatever product or whatever brand is putting money in their pocket, you know, without actually wholeheartedly endorsing it or even like trying it themselves. And they're just going for clicks or views or engagement or a quick dollar or whatever. Yeah, we've like found success with this podcast as like the underdogs, but we're still just two guys podcasting out of my apartment. We haven't like won the rat race, you know? We still don't know what we're doing all these years later.
Yeah, despite all our rage, we're still just two rats in a cage. We understand that this could all end immediately. And I think that, it's credit to the audience, to Throw Gang. Sometimes it's the call coming from inside the house where the biggest haters are letting our listeners of the show and letting us know that they don't fuck with A, B, C, or D, right? But like, if it's not them keeping us in check, it's James and I keeping each other in check. Yeah, I don't know. I try to be honest every day. That's all.
At the same time, though, like I probably do have a bit of a chip on my shoulder where it's like, they didn't think we could do this. And I think it is important to like approach that. And whether it is like you're working with a brand and they're like, oh, actually, could you guys just like do this? And we're like, no, because like you got to pay us to do that. We're not just going to like do you a favor, brand, you know? And I think the two collaborations with Mr. Porter, where we collaborated with a dozen or so brands on product, and then that was sold exclusively on Mr. Porter. People point to that as kind of a watershed, you made it moment. And absolutely, like working with a institution that's been around since we were those young peons at BPMW, working with that was like crazy awesome. That wouldn't have happened if it weren't for the personal connections we had with a bunch of people that were working on that project. And to me, the coolest part of that project was we were able to get small brands, Small Talk Studio, Maiden Name, we were able to get them onto Mr. Porter in a way where Mr. Porter, like all of a sudden these small brands were like making money in a way and getting exposure in a way that they were going to eventually, but up until that point didn't necessarily have. With Maiden Name, it's like a small brand here in New York. Through that project, we collaborated on jewelry, and through cash infusion that Mr. Porter gave them from like making an order, they were able to jumpstart their jewelry program that is still like going 2-3 years later. So I think like it's all about perspective too, where it's like Lawrence and I are going to be like, we did it, we won, we're on top of the mountain, because it's all, well, got a podcast, what the fuck are we going to talk about this week? So even as we're growing, it's like the same, the slog is still there, and I think that the slog itself keeps us in check.
Also, the fact that you guys don't always have the same opinion on things, even like tucked in t-shirts, it keeps it interesting and keeps it fresh and non-prescriptive as a whole. But we have to ask, because you guys talk a lot about wanting to spotlight people you'd like to support, new talent and such. So who is Throwing Fits approved that we should all be aware of?
Oh man, I actually wrote this down because I always forget whenever I'm like put on the spot. But right now, for me, it's Our Legacy will always be my number one, or Our Legace, as we call it. But it is Our Legacy for those that are hearing it for the first time and may be confused. I'm just going to run through it if that's cool. For me, Forest Designs, I think Angelo Urrutia is doing some of the most interesting stuff in menswear. And this is one of those brands where it's like you have to touch it and you have to wear it to like really get it. Connor McKnight is this young buck who like every season just gets better. And I think we collaborate with him on some stuff for Mr. Porter. And it's the last 2 seasons, he's been able to like really expand and touch on suiting, technical, luxurious fabrics. He's just doing it. And I think he's on the cusp of big things. I mentioned Maiden Name. Their apparel is also, again, fucking up there. And Eckhouse Lotta is a similar brand where it's these two downtown brands that are very like avant-garde and they're very by and for the queer community. But I think that, you know, while they're out there more so than Lawrence and I would generally place ourselves aesthetically, I think that like we're in this time where you can borrow or like dip in a little bit. And there's Eckhouse Lotta pieces where I'm never going to be an Eckhouse Lotta head to toe. Do I have like my favorite boots right now from Eckhouse Lotta because they make me look tall and awesome and very hard? Yeah. And like, is there stuff from Spring that's in a certain context that they present it isn't my aesthetic or like what I like? Yes. They're also, their versatility is such that like I can take it and work it into my own wardrobe. And I think that's just what personal style eventually is. MF Pen out of Denmark, I think is doing like very interesting things, but very subtly, where they're infusing this like sexiness and like sultriness into more classic menswear pieces. The apparel from Roa, I think, is at the vanguard of what I'm calling Gorp 2.0, where it's not purely for the trail, but it is very, again, the versatility is such that like you can climb a mountain on it or you can just fucking hang out in it. Same with CP Company, same with his brand J La L, I believe is how you pronounce it. In terms of the big dogs, I love what CP Company is doing. We were just in their campaign because, again, those are just like friends. And what Kiko is doing at ASICS, I think, is one of my favorite things in footwear right now. And then there's our homies at 316. I think like the pace at which 316 is expanding, they were first and foremost a denim brand. But the joke for me, at least, was like, yo, like the best shirting right now is being done by the denim brand. Like, what's going on here? But now they're getting into footwear. And they do it at a pace they've been around for, they are celebrating their 20th anniversary, or they just did. The pace at which they do it, I think, is something that I definitely respect and would love to like emulate, where you're not doing it just for the sake of doing it. You're like studying it, you're mastering it, and then you're very slowly putting it out into the world at a pace that is like where people can acclimate and experiment, but you're not like switching up the whole brand just for the sake of what is hot right now. They are really masters of like studying the craft and then slowly getting into it themselves and putting out their own version of it, which I think is something to respect. And they have the luxury of doing that because they have the denim heads that are always going to support the brand. And it's kind of like a parallel to us, where we have the podcast and the subscribers for the Patreon, where we can like slowly start to dip our toe into other realms that before we couldn't do just to do, because the risk has been mitigated by having a foundational base of subscribers. That's it for me. Sorry.
No, that's a great laundry list from James. In typical fashion, I did not prepare anything. So just off the top of my head, I think if I could dress in any brand head to toe right now, it would be Stofa, a New York brand run by two friends. We're hoping that they could come on the podcast soon so they can share their story. Just an elite taste level, elite styling. It is expensive, but they have just opened their first ever storefront. So it's not just necessarily like an appointment only thing. They've expanded into footwear, but now you can go off the street, check out a bunch of like really great ready to wear options. I think that the clothing item I get the most kind of questions about on like IG DMs when I wear them. So like when I'm doing my glorified customer service and chopping it up with the people, it's these shorts that they make. They're just beautiful, blousey, pleated shorts. So definitely Stofa for sure. Our friend Edgar at And After That, he was part of the most recent Porter capsule collection. Edgar and I are two lovers of movies. And I think that just like the kind of, I don't even want to call them bootlegs because it's I think so elevated in terms of taste. But when it comes to like quote unquote merch, and even he's expanding past that, but just like anything in terms of the best music and movie references on stuff, if you're not going to pay 10x to get some vintage tee because some kid's cool uncle died and he raided his closet, I think that Edgar at And After That is crushing. To James's point about Kiko, the Kiko like artsy, more street brand, Auto 958 is awesome. They have collabed with ASICS. That was my favorite sneaker of last year. I wear a bunch of their hats. They do like really cool tees and stuff as well. So that price point is like super approachable. Another one of these Scandinavian brands that actually James put me onto, and I want to make sure they get shout out as well, is this brand Sunflower, which is also out of Denmark. Sunflower is incredible. I think they're about to have a big year. I know they just got some new stockists in New York, so people will be able to try that on and see for themselves. I love what our homies Cole and Jacob are doing out of Portland with Bare Knuckles. They're like us. They're not on a fashion calendar. They're doing this themselves. These guys have been in the game. They have the pedigree. And I think this brand that they do, Bare Knuckles, is fantastic. And then finally, I think Studio Nicholson is a brand that probably, you know, some listeners of the show are familiar with, but we're building a relationship with those guys. And when it comes to these big statement pieces, that big overcoat that every guy wants, or that perfect kind of quarter zip knit. Like Studio Nicholson has that stuff. Amazing trousers too. The big question we always get asked, right, is like, where do we get pants? Like guys don't know where to get like good pants. And I would say it's worth saving up some money and getting something spicy and different that you're not going to have to do the Spider-Man meme with when you see the other fashion homie in your neighborhood, or if you live in Brooklyn, 5 other guys on the street when you go to get coffee. I think Studio Nicholson is fantastic as well.
Always on your A game. That's like a pretty robust list. Here I was thinking 5 different guys, and you guys have just done the deep dive. But also you're New York based, right? And as always, you have an incredible point of reference across a number of categorical aspects of culture. So what do you think the rest of us should be paying attention to in this city of the world?
It's tough. Like it is truly the rent is too damn high. It is truly like, it's sad, the amount of fucking cornballs that can come here and just live in a faceless condo and fucking eat sweet green every day and literally live a suburban existence. Like you move to New York and you're just like repeating your suburban existence from where you came from. That is like one born of convenience. And just, again, you're just doing what you've been conditioned and told to do. The amount of DIY spaces, the amount of creatives, the amount of brands, fashion, the amount of restaurants that have to close down. I mean, literally, I live in Greenpoint, and there's a local like neighborhood IG account called Greenpointers, and it feels like every other post just like, this beloved bar that has been in the neighborhood for 40 years, the landlord has increased the rent to $20,000 a month, and they're like, we cannot do that. It's not all doom and gloom. I think, especially as the days warm up, we are seeing it. And I'm not going to veer away from fashion necessarily, because I think that like New York retail, we lamented it for being dead for so long. But you are starting to see, and I hope this is reflective of other realms of culture, you are starting to see like interesting things happening and people like actually breaking through. Colbo, I think, is one of my favorite stores in New York. And I think they're a great example of how a store can be more than just a store. Every weekend, they have some sort of like music component, a wine tasting. They have a food integration and pop-up. They have a different vintage curator in the back. And they're stocking brands that you don't necessarily find in the big department stores or like even in the big like online stores. There's that discoverability, and they've built a community. You can literally walk by and just meet friends and hang out for like 2 hours. The same is true of a vintage store just around the corner called Leisure Center, where again, they did a fucking workshop where it's like you bring in your jeans and they have a tailor there that will just chop them into jorts. And they were like, people are just hanging out all day. So I think like hanging out, so back right now.
That's what's contemporary now, is hanging out. I know you're going to ask that later, but that's the answer.
You need spaces to hang out in. And I think like retailers, they are purveyors of space. Obviously, they're trying to sell you stuff, but like those that, again, go beyond and bust out of the parameters, like we are a fashion and clothing store. No, people don't only care about that. It's pretty simple to get people to like hang out and talk and chat and meet new friends, bring old friends, get some good wine, some good music, some food. Fashion is the vessel, fashion is the portal with these retailers. That I think is where like you can spend a whole weekend just hopping around and hitting these different places. It'll feel very fulfilling. You like link up with people, groups form, you go get some dinner, you go to a bar after. That's a great fucking Saturday. A few years ago, that was pandemic withstanding. That was not necessarily doable because we didn't have these spaces. Finally, New York, I think, is starting to get this back a little bit, whether it's around like music venues or retail spaces, that it feels like there's some like movement in the right direction towards that, even as like the rents continue to go up. Creatives and immigrants are getting priced out of the city and it becomes just corny finance guys. It does feel like the pendulum is swinging back a little bit.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Just a couple other shout outs. Great stores in New York. CHCM, shout out Sweetu Patel, maybe the most tasteful man in all 5 boroughs. Our friend Justin has a great shop in the West Village called Quavo, where you can try on what James is saying about Kobo. A lot of brands that you might have only seen online or that you've never seen before, and just getting familiar with them and trying stuff on and seeing how it works for you. That's the beauty of multi-brand retail, especially as most shopping in the city now is going to a flagship or you're going to an outpost. But yeah, those places are amazing. Also, our friend Kevin, who is in Greenpoint, right around the corner from James, where we record, Fantasy Explosion, another great store where you can take your time, browse around, hang out, have a beer, have a conversation. I really think that James could not have said it better, where it's about, I mean, this is corny, but it's real. You got to get out there and fucking experience it. If you just moved to New York to have a more cool high-end version of what your life might have been before you got here. It's not that you shouldn't be here or anything like that. I'm from New Jersey. I didn't grow up here, but I think that, with so many people consuming culture via screens, like I understand, like I do that as much as anybody else. Like my screen time is embarrassing, and I will not say it publicly, but you have to exist and experience the things that you are interested in person. And I know that's easier said than done, especially for people that live in New York. But it is always sad when it's almost like nothing sadder than wasted potential. If you live in New York and you're not taking advantage of all the amazing stuff that is, hopefully at most a couple train stops away or a train ride away, whatever, you're doing a disservice to yourself more than anything.
You guys are touching upon the idea that experiential things are the face of contemporary. And a lot of people are discussing what offline looks like, and that being an increasingly more popular thing as we're all glued to different versions of the screen. So that absolutely hits home and resonates.
It is discouraging to be like, yeah, everyone's on their phone. Everyone's just like pointing the camera on themselves. So if we can just be like a rallying point, if you don't listen to the fucking podcast, great. If we can just be like a rallying point for you to like get outside, get off your phone and like actually chat and talk and hang out, we've done our fucking job.
But again, it just goes back to that descriptive thing where if it's a show about friendship and enthusiasm and interest that friendships can form out of, and we are facilitating that to any degree via all the various channels that we are lucky enough to have because the show has an audience, then I feel like we're ultimately doing our job. And if this show brings you joy or entertainment or ultimately a new friendship, then that's something that I'm very proud of.
And that's a beautiful segue into the last and final question, which is, of course, what is contemporary now?
Everything being broken into a million pieces and there not being a dominant hegemony is good. And I think like it's just a matter of like, can you find what you are most comfortable with and what is best for you? So I think that the next wave of creators who will be in their early 20s at this point will have been born into a world of ubiquitous imagery where digital had put analog to bed, and the amount of like referential information and research that one can do when they're looking back from like the time they were born is now infinite. So I don't know what's going to be born of that. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Will everything just be a fucking carbon copy of what's already been? Or can people take what has already been and work it into something brand new that does feel exciting, whether that's in the form of music or fashion or aesthetic or anything that was documented from the realm of culture? People come into their 20s and adulthood and they start having a role in the zeitgeist. It will be interesting to see how much is just recycled, whether it's, oh, we're doing Y2K, or how much of it is like actually born from referential, because everything is a reference, but done in a way that feels like actually exciting and new and fresh. And so far, it's felt like more the former, where it's, all right, you're just like ripping what you're seeing from 20 years ago, but something's always going to break through. And I don't know, it feels like we're primed for that.
Yeah, I'm with James. I feel like a lot of things that are happening, that a lot of things that are contemporary now feel like carbon copies of things that whether we lived through them or a previous generation did, which is fine, right? I'm not here to be like Y2K bad or anything like that. I don't know. For me, I don't know. For me, it always comes down to like motivation and doing things because they actually make you feel good. For me, the whole getting dressed thing is I want to feel like the best version of myself when I'm walking out the door, because that I would hope will set my day off in a positive direction. And obviously, listen, it gets derailed like anybody else's more often than not, because that is the pain of human existence. But no, I think that this idea of, and James and I think have, fallen into this trap before, and some of this social media stuff that we might have railed against on this show or in the past, it's part of what we do for a living. But this me shit that James is talking about, this idea of only wearing an outfit so that you can get a picture on Instagram so that people will like it, versus putting on an outfit that makes you feel good when you walk out the door so that you can start your day off in the most positive way possible. I don't know. For me, if anyone could take anything away from this, what's contemporary now for me is like, why are you doing something? What is the motivation? As long as we're not hurting anybody else, that would be a non-starter. But if you are doing something because you actually want to do it and you think it is going to have a positive impact on who you are and how you are going about your life, then I would say you're on the right track.
Lawrence and I, we had a moment where we were put in a room for this photo shoot with a bunch of like TikTokers. And for me, that was the start of an existential, like, what the fuck am I doing in terms of like social media? That compounded with, I got word that this girl was like, yo, I want to date Dr. Taco. I'm like, Dr. Taco is not a real person. Like all this presentation that we're putting out there, that is not what is real. And so I think that you hear about Gen Z, like they're putting their phones down. And I think that feels very wise and beyond their years. Even Lawrence Hay was talking about, he's like, I'm getting sick of this social media shit like you. And I'm like, yeah, welcome. I mean, it's so corny, but it's, yo, I didn't take any photos last night because I was having mad fun. Yeah, that's what living life is. So I hope that the enthusiasm maintains and continues growing. And it feels like that's what is really driving people to like get out there, try their own thing, be independent, try new shit, find new friends. But at the same time, for the right reasons, like Lawrence was saying, where it's not about, yo, I'm doing this I'm wearing the pants on my arms so I can get on Instagram. Wear the pants on your arms because it makes you feel good.
Yeah, exactly.
Beautifully said, as always. And thank you so much for coming on the show, guys. I was really stoked about having you, and it was a good time as expected.
Thank you, Chris.
It was great. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of What's Contemporary Now. A special thanks to our show's producer, Cheyenne Asadi, who makes it all possible. Audio post-production by Griffin James, with original theme music by Joseph Top Miller and Chase Coughlin of the Black Soft, and visual design by Aaron Meager and Graham Prentice. Subscribe now to be the first to catch new episodes every week, and if you've enjoyed listening, we'd love to hear from you. Leave us a review and let us know your thoughts. Your feedback helps us improve and reach more listeners like you. Follow us on Instagram, Threads, and LinkedIn for additional content, and join the conversation around what is contemporary now.